Hello, Smitty G here, another educational video. Today I want to talk a little bit about counting and rhythms. And as such, this doesn't have a specific instrument in mind. This applies to all music. So I'm going to deal with just good old-fashioned hand claps and counting to explain what I'm talking about here. In music, if you go through formal training like school band or whatever, they talk about time signatures and measures and bars and all of this. And nothing against that, but if you don't have that background, none of that means anything. So I prefer to use a term called pulse. And that is, what's the primary pulse that you count for each chord? All right, what are most of the chords given in a song? And in American popular styles of music, this is normally going to be 2 pulse, 3 pulse, or 4 pulse. 4 is the most common, and that's why it's referred to in music terms as common time. So what's going to happen here is for each cycle of the chord, we're going to hear and be able to count that pulse before we go to change chords again. So for example, I'll just play the pulse. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. For example, if I were to do the song Marshall Tucker Band's Can't You See, that would be a D, 2, 3, 4, C, 2, 3, 4, G, 2, 3, 4, D, 2, 3, 4, D, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So each chord, I called out the chord name for beat 1 and then counted off the rest of the pulses. For some songs out there, each chord may only get 3 pulses. This is extremely common in like a country waltz. So, you know, we'd sit here and go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I could sit here and do a song like G, 2, 3, G, 2, 3, C, 2, 3, G, 2, 3, and so on. Once we get to our basic pulse, then we can talk about how we divide that pulse. And there's 2 primary ways we go about this. The first and the more common is we split it in half. In musical terms, we'll call this, again, if I go back to our 4 pulse as our most common time, then I can call a bar 4 pulses. Each of those is a quarter of the bar. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 quarters equals $1. 4 pulses make up the bar. Each pulse is 1/4. We'll call those a quarter note. And again, I'm not worried about you memorizing the terminology. Just so if you hear it out there, that's what they're talking about. Well, if I take a quarter and split it in half, then that is 1/8. And again, I'm not going to take you back through your elementary school math lessons. Just trust me on it. So how we normally count that is we'll say and. So we'll go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so forth. Now, all of these claps that I'm doing here, they can all be replaced with strums on a guitar, individual note picks, a slap on a bass, a hit on a drum head. It doesn't matter. All musical instruments have a rhythmic element to them, and that's what I'm discussing here. So you can take those pulses and divide them up to create various rhythms. The other way to divide it up is instead of in half, we divide them into what we call triplets. And so we'll get something like this, again, doing a common time pulse. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, and so on. So what's happened is each one of those pulses, instead of being sliced in half, they're sliced in thirds. And those two types of subdivisions pretty much cover everything you're going to deal with in normal pop music. And when I say pop, I mean not just pop songs. I mean what we call popular American music: pop, country, rock, blues, so forth. So when you're listening to a song and you're trying to learn it, you're trying to figure out how to play it, your first task is to figure out what pulse you need to count by. Now, some songs you might hold out a chord longer than just 4 even, but it's normally in that situation going to be multiples of 4. For example, it'll be 2 bars of 4 or 8 beats, something along those lines. So whatever makes your math easiest is how you tend to think of these things. So like I said, 2 pulse, 3 pulse, 4 pulse. Once you figure out the basic pulse, then which subdivision fits the groove or feel of the music is, do we split each of those pulses in half, or do we split them into thirds? And that's going to determine, again, what kind of rhythmic activity we do to play this song. Now, we don't have to play every single one of those pulses or the subdivisions. As a matter of fact, the interesting rhythms occur if you go back to one of my previous discussions. The groove is in the spaces, leaving gaps. So if I sit here and I take even a 4 pulse and I'm just playing the downbeats, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's not a bad little pulse right there. That'll get the job done. But I'll create a little bit more interest automatically if I leave something out. In this case, I'm going to leave out 2 and 3. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Right away, we've got a little bit more interest happening. We've got a little momentum happening here. That little 4th beat bump, as I like to call it, seems to push us forward. It drives into that next chord a little bit. If I take a 4-beat pulse and I divide it into thirds, but I skip out all the middle of thirds, where I went 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. If I skip out number 2 on each of those, I get 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and all of a sudden we get what's known as a shuffle. So if you ever hear somebody talking about a shuffle, a triplet shuffle, that's what's going on right there. It's taking a simple thirds and we're leaving out the middle slice of the pie. Now, you hear me doing a lot of counting, and that's to explain things to you. In the beginning, I also stress this with my students. Counting is pretty important to figuring out how all these different rhythmic activities line up with each other. But you can't count your way through a song. You just can't. In the beginning, yes, to learn the song, but eventually you have to feel this stuff. You have to internalize it. You have to be able to groove with it. So you've got to reach a point where all of this is familiar enough to you that you're not having to count every single beat of every single song. Trust me, that'll exhaust you. All right, so let's talk about one of the things that happens here when we start comparing different ways we could break things down. All right, for example, 2 and 4, if I should think of a song as a 2-pulse or a 4-pulse. Well, is there really that much difference? I mean, think about it. You're hearing the claps right here. What's the feel difference between 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2? And in some instances, it really can be that academic. It's just whatever makes sense to you. For me, the dividing line normally comes down to, when am I changing chords? If I tend to change chords every other beat or 2 counts, it's a lot easier for me and mentally to think of it in those terms instead of going, chord 2, chord 4, chord 2, chord 4. I'm sitting here constantly changing chords in the middle of the bar. Mentally, it's much easier for me to sit here and go C2, G2, D2, A2, and so on. So it's going to be a bit of a comfort factor, whatever makes sense to you. Now, if you're getting to the point where you're studying music in school, they're going to have some rules you're going to follow. Follow the rules. You get up to the college level and you're getting to various forms of composition, they're going to have rules for this kind of stuff. Follow the rules. I'm not dealing with that. This is down and dirty street fighting musicianship. This is getting through the gig. This is learning how to jam with your buddies. Nobody's going to sit here and care how you're counting it as long as it feels right and sounds right. That's all that matters. So you come up with a count that makes sense to you, that makes it easier for you to keep your place. One area I see a whole lot of confusion is when we go to 3s. For some reason, 2s and 4s doesn't bother so much. But we start getting to multiples of 3 and things get a little tricky. For example, what in musician terms it's called 3/4 time. In other words, we get 3 pulses, and the 4 represents a quarter note. I know there's only 3 of them, weird, but it's talking about a written format in that case. So I'm just going to call it a 3-pulse versus 6/8 time. And the trick to this is that 6, we don't actually feel 6. We don't get a pulse of 6. Off the top of my head, I can't readily think of a song where mentally I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Instead, how we tend to feel 6/8 time is 2 pulses broken into triplets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Actually, I don't even do the 4, 5, 6. Mentally, I just count it as 1, 2, 3 and double. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, if you compare that to 3/4 time or a 3-pulse split in half, we still get 6 hits. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 3 and. But listen to how they feel, and it's going to be a totally different situation. So my first example, I'm going to clap a 3-pulse split in half. Now I'm going to take 6/8 time, or 6-pulse, or pardon me, it's going to be a 2-pulse split in triplets. So each pulse gets 3 hits. So even though both of those examples, I'm doing 6 hits in a bar, they have a totally different feel to them. The first one has 3 pulses split in half. The second one has 2 pulses split into thirds. How you're going to feel that and play it, and how your audience is going to feel it and interpret it as far as bobbing their head or tapping their feet or even dancing is going to be a totally different conversation. So don't, just because your main count adds up the same, don't sit here and assume they're interchangeable. They are not, under no circumstances. So again, find your primary pulse, then figure out what subdivision you're going to go with. Now, this works great for all of what I call our regular types of times. Even though some of the blues stuff that, 6/8, 9/8, 12/8 and all that's considered complex. Truth of the matter is, no, it's pretty straightforward. Again, how many pulses, and we divide it into 3 instead of 2. Otherwise, nothing fancy's happening there. What if we're in a situation where we don't have nice, clean numbers like that? What if we're in 5 time, or 7 time, or even, let's say, 11 time? Now that seems really weird, and as a matter of fact, in American terms, we call that odd time. But and I stress that only in American terms. You get into Middle Eastern music, you get into African music, you get into Asian music, some South American forms. It's not as uncommon for them at all. As a matter of fact, you get into Middle Eastern music playing in 11, 13, 17, something like that, is way more normal for them than sitting there keeping 4 beats to the bar. That's something they hardly ever do. So when you're trying to feel these odd time signatures, the trick is divide them down into easy, manageable chunks, normally 2s and 3s. So let's take an 11 feel. There is no way I can sit here and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't even have enough air to keep that going 2 full bars. Instead, I'm going to break it down into pulses and feels. So in this case, I'm going to do 3 pulses of 3, which is going to give me 9. 3 times 3 is 9. And then I'm going to do a final pulse of 2. So 9 plus 2 is 11. So again, any complex time can be counted in this way. And where I put that to is just what makes sense for the music. I could have sat here and went, and so on. And I know that's a subtle thing. I don't even know how well it comes through on the camera. Mentally, it made perfect sense to me. I could feel the accents and knew exactly which was the driving point of those beats. And again, all of this comes down to finding a basic count. Rhythmically, what I'm going to strum or what notes, when I play my notes, is going to depend on the music. I could sit here and take those 3s and again sort of shuffle them and then play the double. And so on. So as long as you can keep count and straight your 3s and 2s, then it's very easy to keep your place even in an odd time situation. So this is something I recommend you work with just like I've been doing it. Play some music, clap along with it. Get an idea of where the pulse is. Is it a 2 pulse, 3 pulse, 4 pulse? How can you divide it up and it makes sense? Is it doing a 3 subdivision or a 2 subdivision? Once you can clap along with a song doing that kind of stuff, then you can pick up your instrument, bass, guitar, ukulele, whatever, and come up with a strum pattern or a picking pattern that makes sense. Because once you know what to do with your fretting hand as far as what chords to play or what note pattern to go through or what shape to put your hand in, everything comes down to the picking hand. And whether you use a pick, finger style, slap, whatever, this hand if right-handed, is controlling that rhythm. So knowing your pulse, knowing your subdivision is going to determine what options are available to you as far as strum patterns, picking patterns, and so forth. And that's a whole other discussion as to once you figure out what your basic math is or your groove is, how do we convert that into a picking pattern or a strumming pattern? I'll save that for another conversation. Right now, like I said, I want you to take some time, listen to some of your favorite music, and break it down, analyze it a little bit. See what your pulse count is, what makes sense to you. Pay attention to when you hear chord changes. Even if you don't know what the chords to the song are, you can hear when the music changes. And that'll determine, is it a 3 pulse, 2 pulse, 4 pulse, whatever. Once you get that major hurdle out of the way, how can you divide this up and it makes sense? You get the pulse right, but you do the subdivision wrong, and it's not going to feel right. You're just not going to line up with the music, no matter how hard you try. So it's going to be one of those things that'll be very obvious to you with a couple of tries as to which one you should be in. Then you can get a little bit more zoned in as, okay, what exact strum pattern or hit pattern will make most sense with this song? Once you've worked that out, you know what your rhythm is. All you got to do is convert it to your instrument. Divide and conquer is what this is all about. The first thing you got to do, of course, learn your chords that go to a song. Learn what notes go with a melody. Then you got to get the rhythmic aspect of it down so it sounds correct. You have to understand your pulses, or beats as some people call it. You have to understand which subdivision makes sense. All right, I'm going to leave you there. This was a fairly long video for me, but there was a lot of things I wanted to touch on. I might double back and go into this area a little bit more in depth down the road. I feel it's something that doesn't get covered enough in a lot of private lessons, gets glossed over. It's not as exciting as learning a new chord, as learning a rhythmic pattern, but I think it's really what makes the difference between a capable musician and one that is not so capable. It all comes down to the rhythmic side of things. Because I can take a raw beginner out there, and if we're both playing a song with a G, a C, and a D, I might be able to change chords a little quicker, but their G, their C, and their D is probably just as good as mine. So what do I bring to the table that they don't already have? And that's going to be on the rhythmic side of things. That's going to be how I know how to use my picking hand to define a rhythm and present that information to the listener. Anyway, have a little bit of fun with this. I'll try to keep these conversations interesting, come up with something else down the road to throw out there. Once again, hope everybody's doing well. I'm still sheltered in place. I know some of the businesses out there are starting to open it up. If you're one of those getting out and about, be careful about it. I want to see everybody make it through. Take care now.